we'll go ahead and get started. Let me try to remember. I remember we got to, wait, past this to here. We got pretty much to here last time, I believe. I remember talking, well, oops, the line's in the wrong place. There we go. I remember talking quite a bit about this guy, this kind of thing.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So we got at least there. And now we're on to the next thing. Okay, so we've got a hair here, which is perfectly clear. We got this kind of deal in the hieratic, which, you know, it's about as straightforward as hieratic ever gets. And we got a new sentence that we have not read yet. So who wants it?
I could try it.
All right, go for it, Kevin.
And it starts there with Ben. Ben 2 rec uja ujau.
Yeah, ujau.
Empa S2 SSW.
Yeah, so this is 2. You can transcribe it senu or senu, Coptic sneu. This word, interestingly, often transcribed z. It survives only in like a prefixed form in some Coptic words where it's za something. I can't even remember the words at this point, but it's like za sashe or whatever, which is not actually the right word, but like it's like man of X, and it's a way of identifying a profession. I think there's saneh, oil merchant, something like that. I think this might be a Coptic word. I'm making it up a little bit, but it might be a Coptic word. In which case you can plainly see like this is just the word for oil, and then this is what remains of the word sa, and because it's a prefix, it's not actually stressed. So that tells us that this ah sound is the unstressed version of the ah sound, which comes from an e type vowel, you know, phonetically. So this word was probably pronounced something like C in actual spoken Egyptian. Yeah, but it doesn't survive on its own into Coptic. So that's why we often transcribe it Z.
Where'd you get the N from? In the Sanu.
Oh, the second N here, Senu.
Or even the first N. I thought man is just S.
Oh no, these are different words. I'm talking about here. I have this. Oh wait, oops, I drew that wrong. Sorry. I have this thing is one thing, and then this was all another thing. So, sea snail, 2 men.
Oh, okay, gotcha. All right, sorry. Yeah, I figured it out. I understand.
Yeah, I jumped between the two really quickly, so sorry about that.
Yep. Okay, I'm gonna go on. Or should I just translate that part?
Let's do this part. This kind of stands alone.
Okay. I think Ben 2, and I'm not sure, is like no one, and then 2, I don't know. I don't understand the second 2.
Okay, so this is a good time to talk about this. We have these things called subject pronouns, and they always begin with a 2, and then they have some kind of suffix. So the word for I in the first present, which you know from Coptic is D, this is 2E in late Egyptian, right? And so this 2 it's a prefix. It probably actually comes from these are probably the same word etymologically, just serving two slightly different functions. Think about examples in English. Like we might have a sentence like, I thought that was the one that I wanted. So you have a sentence with that in it. But as a, you analyze it grammatically and you realize that there are two different versions of the word that. That's kind of what we have here. So we have two, the one that means one, it became a sort of like a pedestal for a suffix pronoun to stand on, just generally for the first present verbal construction. But then we still have this 2 that means one, or we translate as one. It's just kind of a generic someone. We don't know who. We don't even know how many people. It's kind of a dummy pronoun that stands in for we don't know who. We often translate this 2 as the passive because this is what the English passive does. Like if I were to say mistakes were made, that's a deliberate statement that like avoids a subject, right? Egyptian accomplishes that by using this kind of throwaway pronoun 2 that doesn't necessarily refer to anyone in particular. And then so we have 2 of these things together. So we have 2, and that makes so this is the first present or the adverbial sentence subject prefix thing. It's a prefix for pronouns to stand on. And then in this case, it's the pronoun itself. So together, they're just one. Does that make sense? It's a little weird. It would be a lot easier if we had seen a bunch of examples of like 2E, 2ek, etc. 2n, where you get Coptic T, well ek actually because it changes 10 in the plural, etc. Those all come from this guy plus a suffix pronoun e or n or whatever. And then you can just stick the suffix pronoun 2 onto that, and then you get just a pronoun that means one. So ben tutu rech, what does that mean?
No one knows.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No one knows.
The judgment of these two, of the two men.
So you've translated this in a way that, okay, so it is a noun, but there's different kinds of verbal nouns. There's a verbal noun that's like the abstraction, like judgment, where it actually is kind of a lexeme on its own, judgment. And it's fully nominal. It doesn't really have, like there's a verb at the heart of it, but it doesn't have kind of like a verbal, it's not an action word. Whereas if I were to say, no one knows how to judge them, then we've got an infinitive, which is actually what this is. An infinitive, it's also a noun, grammatically speaking, but it's just a verb that has been temporarily converted into a noun for the sake of syntax. It's still very much a verb in terms of the meaning that it conveys. And do you see a difference between like, I don't know how to judge this situation versus I don't know the judgment of this situation? It's nuanced, right? But one of them is thoroughly nominal and is sort of distanced from the action, whereas I don't know how to judge this. Even though I'm using an infinitive, which is technically a noun, it's still very much an action type of thing that's being expressed. So this is an infinitive, which is why the suffix pronoun here.
And is that an impersonal again, or with the T left out, or?
So the impersonal 2 as a suffix pronoun only occurs it doesn't appear on the infinitive. It only occurs on like sejameth type verbs, which that's not what this is. This is actually like a complementary infinitive of the verb rech, like to know how to do something. So in this case, it's the direct object pronoun. But it is still kind of a dummy. It's literally, one does not know how to judge them, meaning these matters or the arguments or whatever. It doesn't refer back to anything that's been stated. So you could even translate it as, one does not know how to judge these things, where we've never said before what these things are. You're just supposed to understand as the reader, these things refers to the matters that we've been discussing so far in this text, right? It's kind of vague.
I heard everything you said, but your audio is dropping in and out a little bit.
Oh, shoot.
Is other people experiencing that? No? Okay, so it might be on my side.
Ralph, did you experience patchy audio?
I could hear you okay, I think.
Sounded fine to me also.
Okay. Well, if it
everybody-
happens again.
Okay, I understood everything, and
Okay.
I heard you. Thank you. And then the M is a preposition, so the
Yeah.
judgment in of or in these two men.
Yeah. And
Or
yeah, that's
the-
a preposition that doesn't translate well, but it is just in, from, among, between. It also could be the case that this says, one does not know how to judge them, namely these two men.
Judge
Egyptian,
them.
yeah,
Oh.
Egyptian likes to do that. It likes to have a pronoun and then have a noun, just like in apposition to the pronoun. So that would be an okay way of reading it too. Okay. What kind of sentence do we have here?
Nobody knows.
Can really tell.
It's got to be a verbal sentence, right? And then
Yes
with
and no.
the object, without the object being the judgment or the judging.
Yes and no. So this gets really tricky, right? Because to translate this into English, I say no one knows how to judge these things between these two men. That's all fine, and that's definitely a verbal sentence. In Egyptian, syntactically, this is actually not a verbal sentence. So we have the construction. We almost like, we don't have to do it anymore at this time, but in earlier stages of Egyptian, we would have to insert, that's not right. We would have to insert this pronoun here, ben tutu herrech. One is not upon knowing the judging of them, these two men, literally. So this is actually, so if I have a sentence that is composed of subject plus prepositional phrase, what type of sentence is that?
Adverbial.
Yeah, and that's important to note. It sounds like I'm being very pedantic here, right? Because the sentence is expressing a verbal notion. It's by all practical arguments, this is a straightforward verbal sentence. But syntactically, historically, this is actually an adverbial sentence, and that it's worth noting every time we see it, because there will come situations where that distinction actually matters. It affects other things that happen. I guess it doesn't really affect the negation in this case, but it could in some cases.
So can you go over again where the her is, or why it's not there, or just say again why this is an adverbial sentence, why there's a prepositional phrase there.
So historically in Egyptian, there would be like two ways to say this. This one gets really tricky because it's negated, and then we have to go into like the ni sejm nf type construction. But let's keep it simple. Let's just nix this for a second. One knows. How do we say one knows? In Middle Egyptian, this would be rechtu. Good. Yeah. Was that Aurelio who just chimed in?
I finally found my microphone.
Oh, good. I think I need to put the thingy, the papyrus scroll here, and then rechtu. One knows. That's a sejm f with two as the suffix pronoun, which expresses the subject. That's a pretty radically different construction, even just glancing at it. If we have tutu hair rech, these are different constructions. So this is actually a conjugated verb. We have a verb rech, to know, and then we have a pronoun rech in the sejm f construction. And this is a finite verb construction, right? In this other case, we actually have a new sort of pronoun that stands at the front of the sentence. So I'm just going to label this subject. And then we have preposition. And then we have what is actually a noun. It's a verbal infinitive, but it is syntactically a noun. So putting these two things together, we get a prepositional phrase, and we get subject plus prepositional phrase, which is an adverbial sentence. One is upon knowing, literally.
How would you say one is upon the road, or one is upon a boat, or whatever, something traditional?
Yeah.
Let's use as for analogy.
Yeah, I mean, we can do that. I think you can do that with this tutu, actually. Like tutu, m, pa, trying to write pa, tutu
Nice.
m paper. One is in the house, right?
So
this is
structurally exactly the same.
Yeah.
Same type of pronoun, preposition, and then an object.
Yeah. Subject, preposition, noun, phrase, which preposition, noun, phrase makes prepositional phrase. So you have subject attached directly to prepositional phrase, and that's the construction of an adverbial sentence, right? And the reason that this expresses a verbal notion while being syntactically adverbial is because of this use of the infinitive in this way. And this is something that started happening all the way back in Old Egyptian and became very common in Middle Egyptian, and then kind of took over as the way of doing things, just as a matter of course. This is the way Egyptian expresses verbal ideas. It expresses them with prepositional phrase plus infinitive, and that becomes so common that eventually they stop dropping. Oops, I switched to eraser, sorry, didn't mean to. Eventually they just stop dropping the preposition entirely because it can be assumed, right? This phrase is so common that we don't need to say the preposition every single time. You know what it is. And that's where we end up in Coptic with like, your classic Coptic sentence, disodem, I hear, or I am hearing. Interestingly, we have an analogous thing in English. It's not exactly the same, but it's analogous enough to maybe be useful for the sake of argument. We can have I hear, which you can see is a finite conjugated verb because if you change the person, the verb changes also. I hear, he hears. Whereas we also have I am hearing and he is hearing, right? So the verb itself is a nominal form that doesn't change, and it's actually this copular verb that changes. Very analogous sort of situation. Modern English uses this present continuous construction all the time. We use it more often than we use the simple present. And it's gone to such an extent that to say something like, I go to the movies is a different sentence from I am going to the movies. I'm going to the movies describes something that I'm actively doing, whereas I go to the movies expresses a sort of gnomic general statement. This is something that I'm in the habit of doing. Very similar thing happened in Egyptian. This continuous type phrase, I am upon going, becomes the standard way of expressing a normal everyday verbal sentence, whereas the finite verb, the sejm f, actually becomes a way of expressing the past. So we have this new construction coming in, becoming dominant, and actually like sidelining the main verbal conjugation and forcing it into like a specialized role because it's just not used all the time anymore. Does that all make sense?
Yes. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, definitely worth knowing about. Really, really important for the historical transition between Middle Egyptian and Coptic. Like if you try to look, I mean, this goes to the heart of the question I get asked all the time, like, why can't we just use Coptic to say what Middle Egyptian sounded like? Well, because how do you pronounce the verbs? Coptic, they're all infinitives because this construction of adverbial sentence with the infinitive as the verb form has totally taken over to the point that all of the verbs that we see in Coptic, with a few scattered vestigial exceptions, are all infinitives. Okay, so now how do we reconstruct a finite verbal construction in Middle Egyptian when the only evidence we have is for infinitives? We have to really, scrape the bottom of the barrel of our Coptic evidence to find any indication of what things would have sounded like, because they just don't survive. And this is the reason. So yeah, the next time someone asks you, why can't we just take Coptic and use that to say what Middle Egyptian sounded like? You can grab them and be like, well, what about the adverbial sentence construction replacing all finite verbs in spoken Egyptian? What do you now do to reconstruct the sounds of finite verbs if they're not preserved? Yeah, it gets complicated. It's really messy. We do have a few examples, just in case anyone's curious. We have this phrase that you've seen in Coptic, he said. This is literally, it's this thing, little jed. Well, that's an ugly jed, but you get it. jedef. The thing which he said. That's what this comes from. And this is actually a sejm f. It's an inflected sejm f. It's the E sejm f form. But it is a sejm f, and it actually shows us that the stress was before the suffix pronoun in the sejm f. Which is actually essential, because if that weren't the case, then the infinitive with direct object pronoun and the conjugated sejm f would sound identical. Because if we have something like desaltmef, oh, that's not correct actually. Shoot, sorry. Let's have isotmef. I did his hearing, literally. In this case, the stress is here. So it must be the case that if we have an actual sejm f, it must be something like satmaf, or whatever the vowel is here. Let's say it's an A, satmaf, with the stress there. Otherwise, these two forms would be indistinguishable in spoken Egyptian. And then we have scattered evidence, like words like this, that tell us that that was in fact the case. The stress is at the end of the word in conjugated sejm fs, and it's at the beginning of the word in the infinitive with direct object suffix pronoun. Yeah, it's tricky. That was maybe too much information for right now, but there it is. Okay, good job, Kevin. We got our hieratic. Let's see I love these twos. These twos are just, oh, they're so elegant. How much of a two that is. Rech looks pretty good. Our little papyrus roll looks great. We even have the little tick at the top. Quail chick looks like all the other quail chicks in this text, so that's pretty good. Jaw is not super great. I mean, we can kind of tell we've got a little jaw here. Yeah, it's not bad. But then this really makes it clear because this is that wedge jaw sign that we're used to seeing. What is this?
That's missing from the transcription.
Is it missing from my transcription or is it missing from Gardner's transcription?
Wouldn't know that quickly.
That is, I think that's Y1. But-
Oh, yeah, it is.
Gardner has a Y1 there.
Okay, well, I just neglected it. Minus this. 3-1. Okay. Yeah, I just neglected to type it. But yeah, so there's a Y1 there that's left out. And then this looks like what it is. So it's not hard. Yeah, all this, it just looks like what it is. There's a little M. There's a really annoying lacuna here that kind of messes up our M, but you can tell that that's what it is. There's a nice paw with its little wings falling off. This, I mean, this is just, look at this word. Like if you encountered that totally out of context, you'd probably still be able to read it. It looks exactly so much like the word. This thing, little abbreviated seated man stroke. So good. Really beautiful. And then the two, like whatever, it's a two. Got it. Okay. All right, so that's all good. And we even found an error, which is always fun. Any questions about this sentence before we move on? I have a question. You should have a question too. I neglected something.
What's the her doing?
Yeah, what does that mean?
Oh,
Is it some kind of connective with the previous sentence?
Yeah,
The butt?
the butt. Yeah. Sounds funny when you phrase it that way, but yeah, it is a butt. Oh, I'm 12 years old. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's a but, it's a so, it's one of these like sentence connectors. So the previous sentence was like, you know, these two dinguses have been fighting for 80 years until now, them being in court. So, or with the result that, or to such a degree that one cannot judge between the two of them. Yeah, it doesn't translate. I always have so much trouble explaining these things because it's one of those things where like, if you read, like let's say hypothetically, if you're a crazy person like me, and I know you are, you take all of late Egyptian miscellanies and you put them side by side with the translation and you just read the whole shebang, start to finish, right? Which wouldn't actually take you that long. It would probably take you, if you're carefully reading the hieroglyphs, it might take you like 5 hours or so. Like not, I mean, it's how long it takes to read a novel. It's not ridiculous or anything. But if you see it a whole bunch of times, it actually clicks perfectly for you. It's like, oh, hair, blah, blah, blah. It means hair. But then you try to translate it into English and it's like, well, it's kind of like but or so or therefore, but it's not really any of those things. It's like one of these, it's a connecting word that English doesn't really have an equivalent of. I think the closest thing is the English word so, because it has a similarly diverse range of meanings. Like I've been talking about this word for a long time, so let's go on to the next sentence. Or I've been talking about this word for a long time, so you probably understand what it means. Those are two entirely different meanings. It kind of means as a consequence of, but not exactly. It's kind of just a way of linking two sentences in a way that signals to the listener there is a logical connection between these two things, and you're perfectly capable of figuring out what it is. That's basically what hair is. It can sometimes have a more well-defined role, but for the most part, it's very fuzzy.
Do you think it's the hair being there has anything to do with the page break or column break, I guess it is? So that's the end of page 2, right?
Yeah. You know, I don't know. That's actually a very testable question. We could just check whether hair tends to appear at line breaks, and maybe it could even be this sort of like meta rhetorical thing where you write it in a text as a way of signaling to the reader that these two things need to go together. I think you would still need to say it out loud though, because if you were to not have it, this is the best way to test it. Let's say we take it out. Pen, don't fail me now, pen. Let's take it out and see what happens. Okay, so these two goofballs who have been in the court, who for 80 years until now have been in court, Ben tutu rech wedjau impa zisnau. Oh, I said sneu before. Oh my gosh. Sneu means brothers. Snau is two. I'm sorry. I just got confused. Yeah, whatever. Okay, let's not get distracted.
Double two means
Mustafa, I think you might have arrived late because we
yeah.
Go back and watch the video because
Okay.
we spoke pretty extensively about that.
Okay.
Very briefly, this is the subject pronoun.
Okay.
And the subject
kind of
pronoun.
impersonal.
Yeah, it's always made up of the prefix to and then some kind of suffix, and this is the impersonal suffix.
Okay. Okay.
So one does not know. Okay, now imagine you don't have hair between those two sentences. Does it still make sense? You need something. You need something to connect the two ideas. It feels like a non sequitur without something in between them.
And one thought on
I guess it is a little bit logical. I get it.
Yeah.
That level of Sprachgefühl, of feeling for the language, I certainly don't have yet. But one thing I did notice is that in the majority of papyri I've seen, basically the line alignment, or how would I say that, like how a line ends, just seems to be driven by saving space. There are a few examples where they really like carefully line up lines and verses, but mostly it's like medieval manuscripts, which typically also are just run on, because papyrus or parchment is expensive and you don't want to waste an inch of it. So I wouldn't pay too much attention to it unless you notice that the whole text is basically trying to line up, how would I say that, verses and lines, which this one doesn't.
And it depends on the text too. Like if we were looking at the pyramid text, almost no line breaks occur in the middle of words in the pyramid text. And that's obviously intentional. We don't need to do a statistical study. It's like 99.9% of line breaks occur at word boundaries, right? And so it's like clearly these are like very, carefully crafted texts. They are not splitting words down the middle to save space. When you have a hieratic text on papyri, they become less careful as a general rule. And that's something that we can know just from having looked at a lot of things. We can say that they're generally less careful. This text tends not to break words at line boundaries, but it can break sentences at line boundaries. Of course it can. Even the most finely crafted Egyptian text, except for things that are deliberately laid out in like a poetic format, every Egyptian text breaks sentences at line boundaries. That's just, I mean, every English text breaks sentences at line boundaries, except for very, very specific formats that are deliberately crafted in that way. I do think there could be something interesting to it if you were to do a sort of large scale analysis and find out, is the conditional probability of hair higher at or near line breaks than it is generally, right? And if you find that it is to a degree that's substantial enough to be worth talking about, well, then we now have a body of evidence that forces us to ask a question, and we would have to hypothesize the possible reasons for that. I don't even know what they would be, but it's, you know, it's a legitimate thing to look at. Doesn't strike me as being the reason. For me, it feels very much like a word that you need because you want to tell the reader that there's some kind of like, these two sentences follow one another in a logical fashion, even though as independent statements, it might not necessarily be obvious how these two things are related. It's the same way we use the English word so. Like, my phone rang, so I dropped my ice cream cone, right? Like, those two things are not necessarily, my phone rang could be a sentence all by itself. I dropped my ice cream cone could also be a sentence by itself. But if I throw in the word so, it implies a chain of causality that you, the listener, are supposed to infer. Like, I like freak out because my phone rang and I, you know, like a spaz, I dropped my ice cream cone. Like, you have to fill all that in though. The sentences don't say any of that. And that's kind of how hair works. Okay, anyway. Thought it was worth pointing out because it's a very frequent word, and it's worth noting, even if it's so far as to say, like, using Aurelio's wonderful like German term Sprachgefühl, like if you haven't read enough for it to kind of sink in, I can at least tell you this would make sense if you had read many more texts, and like that's good enough for language learning, right? Because sometimes the only way to comprehend, you can't put it into words. You just have to feel that it serves some role. It's very vague and impressionistic, but yeah, that's how language works a lot of times. Anyway, okay. So we got another sentence. Somebody want to take this one on?
I'll take it on if there are no
All
other
right, George.
volunteers.
No, you got there first. It's like Jeopardy. You hit the buzzards, you get to answer.
Okay, ich hab en pa neti u en irf or iref, and that poorly translates to please write to us, please write to us that which we are to do about it, or please write to us that which we should do about it or make of it. I'm a little confused by the F at the end.
And that pa neti iwen iref. So that which we, and then there, you have to assume an R in here, which is also omitted.
Okay.
I'll talk about that in a second. So that which we should do it. And then the F is needed because remember the relative pronoun in Egyptian is totally unmarked. It's just neti always, right?
Right.
So you need some way of identifying what is like what part of the relative clause actually connects to the antecedent. You need
I see.
something. it requires what's called a resumptive pronoun. It's called a resumptive pronoun. That's resumptive because it resumes the antecedent within the relative clause. It sort of takes it up and provides a place for it to stand. In English, we handle this differently. We say like, please tell us what we should do. And we have like little hints that tell you like, please tell us who should do it. Would be a different, we would use who,
Right.
and then we would leave out the subject, right? But Egyptian doesn't do it that way. Egyptian just has one sort of totally unmarked relative pronoun that just like pushes you into this subordinate clause, a relative clause, and then it has to have some pronoun within the relative clause that points you back to whatever the antecedent is.
I see.
And that's, this is a classic example, a really straightforward example. The only thing that's slightly tricky here is I said that you had to add in the R. The reason that you have to add in the R, which is actually a backwards way of saying it, the reason that the R doesn't need to be there is because if this were a present tense sentence, that which we are doing it, it would use to in. Oh, I can never write this. To in.
I see.
So there's a difference. It would use the subject pronoun for the first present, and it uses this eu plus suffix pronoun thing for the third future form in Coptic. The equivalent, the late Egyptian equivalent of the third future form in Coptic. So in this case, this would be to in hair, what we are upon doing it, and then in the case we actually have, it's eu when air iref, what we are towards doing it. But because there is this sort of coincidental distinction in the pronoun, it's actually unambiguous which one is intended. So they drop the preposition in both cases.
I see.
Kind of just that's actually a weird idiosyncrasy of late Egyptian. It ceases to be true. Well, kind of, yeah. It's kind of only true right now that you can do that.
So when we see the neti eu and or I guess presumably that could be eu and then some other pronoun, we're to kind of think about something happening in the future or anticipating something rather than tell me what I'm doing right now.
Exactly, and it's something in the future that's sort of it can be optative in the sense that like we should do it, or would that we do it, or we ought to do it. It can be that kind of future. Tell us what we should do, or it can be obligatory. Tell us what we must do, or tell us what we are to do. It can really be any of those things, but it's different from what later becomes the first future in Coptic, which is what we are going to do. So there's actually two separate futures. There's this one, which is a lot more common in late Egyptian. This becomes, this kind of thing, the ene of Coptic, the third future. And then there's, I can make up a fake example that this, I need to put a star next to this, to and the little boat, to in ERF. We are going to do it. And that's like a less marked future. Right? So we have this in English too. I'm going to do it, I will do it, I shall do it. Those all have slight nuance. I should do it. Those are all kind of like future intense, but they all have a little bit of a different nuance to them. One expresses a sort of obligation, another expresses a sort of inevitability. The other expresses a desire, although it's very buried. It's kind of just a future, like I will do it. doesn't really mean I want to do it anymore, but there's still kind of like a hint of that etymological meaning in there. And then I'm going to do it means I'm headed in that direction, but whether it actually happens or not is anybody's guess. You know, the future is unpredictable. You have that exact same distinction in Egyptian. This is the one that says like, yeah, we should do it. We ought to do it. We must do it. Something like that.
Okay.
It's one of those nice cases where you can build the sentence like back up from the end little by little. So ene iref, we shall do it, right? Or I guess in Coptic then like you had ene aaf if you want to. Then you glue the pa-enti in front of it. Can you do that actually in Coptic? Could it be pet ene aaf? That which we shall do? Is that grammatical? Cool. So that's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah.
And then you can put the ash, I mean the ich in front of it. So ash petene aaf, what is it that we shall do?
Ash hovnan petene aaf.
Yeah, but I wanted to put that in last because that I wonder, that's a question. I mean, if you just want to say what is it that we should do, you don't need the hopnan. The hopnan is more like interspersed, right? Like interjected.
Yeah.
Tell us, or what order us is it that we should do? In English, I would want to put like 2 commas there.
Yeah.
Why not hopnan ishpanti?
Oh, I forgot the pet.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting. Initially, that first nan threw me a curveball. So the way George had it as to us makes a lot of sense. You could think it's a subject pronoun, in which case it doesn't make any sense. It makes more sense as a dative here, I think.
Yeah, because if it were a direct object, like a suffix pronoun of hav, that still doesn't work. But even if hypothetically, it would be send us.
Right.
We would be the ones we're going somewhere. Whereas it's not that. It's send to us, like send a message to us. So hovnan, ash hovnan, het ene aaf. That seems like pretty good Coptic to me.
Looks like pretty good Coptic, doesn't it? Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
So the ich isn't connected directly to the hub. It goes more with it's connected to the relative phrase.
Yeah, I think it's like this.
Neti, and then the hope is parenthetical.
Ich pa neti. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a nominal sentence. It's ich pa neti.
Yes, it is a nominal sentence.
The other thing is
just an exhortation in the middle or whatever.
This ich can also mean something like so. It can be a connector. So it's possible that it means send a message to us. Insert saying what we should do. But I don't see any particular reason to read it one way or the other.
Send to us that which we shall do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that we may do it.
That's it. Oh, hieratic. We got some cool stuff in here. All this is straightforward. We got this little guy that we just saw. This one is always kind of wonky because they write it, Aurelio, you might know better than I do, but I feel like they write it like this in that sequence. So 1, 2, 3.
Unlikely.
Okay, tell me.
I've seen 2, I think. Generally, they like to go top to bottom, left to right. So one option would be you do the horizontal on top first, and then you do left, middle, and then you finish it off. That's one option. And I've seen that, for example, in the sailor. You can tell because there's like a little gap between the horizontal on top and the rightmost exactly. You can see that. In this case, though, if you look at that corner, that looks so continuous that I wonder if they didn't go like left, middle, and then finished it up with a horizontal right to get like this kind of hook. sort of that there's no gap suggests that to me. I think that's what they did in this case.
It reminds me a lot of how in calligraphy you write a W if you're trying to write, I forget what it's called, like what we would consider Old English calligraphy, that like down and then a little pull up and then down and a little pull up, then you get the third line. You don't have to draw a horizontal connective member across the bottom. It just kind of goes down, and you just literally just like, it's a quick, because normally you don't want to pull up on these brushes or whatever, stylus, but that top part is like a little quick up and then over, and then that pull down. To me, it looks like it's one horizontal and then down motion, one continuous. Because you can almost see the heavy ink line there at the diagonal between the horizontal top and then the vertical line coming down. There's almost a 45-degree angle, heavy black deposit of ink there. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That also makes me think that these two were connected in this guy's writing style and not separate.
Yeah, just like pull.
There's like
It is also depend on what you use to write hand, using which hand you use to write.
Look at paleography.
I'm sorry.
Can we look at paleography and see if other people do it that way with the connection across the top and right?
There's just one problem
What
with
is this?
paleography in Muller. It's a modern person copying. When in doubt, I mean, let's take a look. But when in doubt, I'd always look at the papyrus, because it's a guy in the early 1900s or late 1800s copying it by hand.
He does it again at the beginning of the next line.
What's the sign code for this? 02 maybe? It's got to be one of the early O's, right?
Ooh.
Oh, I broke it somehow.
Like if you look at the beginning of line 2,
There is no two?
he does. There's another H. There's another hob again at page 3, line 2, right at
You're
the
right.
start.
Yeah. It should be in the next sentence. Yep.
I still see these being like quite continuous here.
Which two?
I think it's
Yeah, I see
continuous.
those as continuous, and then the left-hand side, you can see that diagonal pull, like that sharp up pull.
Yeah.
Then he just finishes off with a down stripe in the middle. Pretty
I
cool.
just suspect they really started on the left because they always do that. That's the interesting thing. Pretty much every sign starts on the left, or on the.
Is that
Yeah,
true
it's
if they're-
it's
Is that
it
true if
gives
they're
you
writing in
this
the other
kind of
direction?
effect, right?
The only-
You're always like going past the end of the sign and then going backwards and then past and backwards in hieratic.
What you mean?
You're going like, so things generally start on the left, even though the script is right to left. So you kind of, you start here and then draw the sign, and then start here and draw the sign, start here and draw the sign. So everything, if you look at it overall, you have kind of this like back and forth pattern to things.
Yes. Yes. I mean, it's very clear in the pa, for example, in the pa bird in the middle of your screen. I mean, you start the bird like, yep, exactly like you just did it. Then you add the wings, then you add the little aleph, and again, you start on the left until you get to the, yep, exactly. And you can see it in the N very clearly too. I mean, the only way you would get the N and NT is if you start left and then go down. There's no way to do it the other way around. It would never look like this. And I would claim then you do the T, then you do the double strokes. So yeah, it's interesting. They go sign by sign in the logical sequence, but each sign is left to right, unless it's a long falling. The exceptions would be like exactly like an F, like a J, or like a long U. Those are going from right to
F
left.
is clearly like that. Yeah.
Yep.
But they look noticeably different. Whenever a sign does truly go right to left, it looks different from all the others. It stands out as having been drawn in that way.
Right.
Okay, so this is a good stopping point. So we've got like 5 minutes left. I have a pretty important announcement to make that is probably going to come as unpleasant news. So I'm going to take a hiatus from these courses, including this one, for at least the next 4 months. Part of the reason for this is that I looked at my schedule for the next 4 months, and I was going to have to miss roughly half the classes, and it's really chaotic. We have like, because of like traveling and other sort of personal events. So we would be like on for 2 weeks and then like off for a week and then on for a week and then off for 2 weeks. It just gets really crazy. But a much bigger reason is just that my weekly work schedule has gotten much busier than it was during the pandemic. I'm basically like working full business hours, and doing that and also doing nights and weekends has just gotten, I'm just completely overwhelmed. So I'm going to just take a break. Basically, I don't have much. I guess it is my choice, but I don't really have a lot of choice about it at this point. So what that means is we won't be having class for the next little while. We're going to talk about, I know we're talking about like setting up some kind of organization, and I think we need to figure out how, how we can make things work so that the times and things are manageable. But at least for the immediate future for me, it just isn't manageable. So I have to stop doing this for a little while, and I'm genuinely sorry about that, because the last thing I want is to disappoint you guys or let you down. But it's, yeah, I can't do otherwise. I talked to my friends and family about it all week, trying to find some kind of solution for my schedule where it's not just totally killing me. And this is really the only thing that I can change. So that's the way it is. Part of that I really need to say is all of you guys here are like advanced student patrons. I fully encourage you to pause your advanced student support during this hiatus. The last thing I want is to take something for nothing, or not fulfill my end of a bargain. So yeah, so that is the situation. I'm still planning to have office hours tomorrow, so I know we've only got a few minutes left here. You probably have thoughts about this. Let's meet tomorrow for office hours. We can talk about it more. I'll make the same announcement in the next class as well, and I'll put out an announcement on Discord, sort of make it official, and then tomorrow we can discuss, and you guys can let me know what you think, or you can be angry at me if you want to. I'll totally understand. I'm not at all happy about it, but it is the situation that I find myself in. Yeah. So
it's good to know when it's time to step back.
Yeah, take a break. It's totally understand. Not take a break, but obviously there's other things going on, so that's totally understandable.
I ended up getting a whole bunch of like sort of day job type work, and I'm at this point I've been trying to do both for a little while now, and it's just not sustainable. I just can't do it. I don't think anyone could. I mean, Elon Musk claims to work 100 hours a week. Maybe he could do it, but so yeah, but we'll talk about it more tomorrow, and I'll welcome your thoughts and feelings about it. And yeah, so that's the situation as it stands. Yeah. Okay.
Fully understand.
Okay.
Yeah, totally
we'll
understand.
talk more. And I'll see you guys in Late Egyptian in just a couple minutes.
All right.
All right. Bye, everyone.
See ya.